Hi, welcome to the Libertarian Alternative. My name is Mark Selzer, and this is an educational television show brought to you by the Libertarian Party as a service to your community. Today's guest is Michael Badnarik. He is the Libertarian Party's presidential candidate, and today we are going to be talking about the Constitution. Now, Michael, you've been very inspired by the Constitution, and one could say this inspired you to run for president.
It did, and I've been studying the Constitution for about 20 years. And when I started studying the Constitution, I was moderately confused because I looked at the Constitution and I looked at our government. I couldn't see a relationship between the two. And one day it dawned on me that the reason that I can't see the relationship is because there is none. And unfortunately, most of what our government does these days is unconstitutional.
But hasn't America changed? I mean, shouldn't the government change along with the times?
Well, in this, the Constitution can be amended. However, the basic principles that the Constitution is founded on do not change. We are human. We have individual rights, and the government works for us. Those are things that will never change. And anytime the government tries to usurp its authority or to do any more than protect our lives, our liberty, and our property, then it is the government is exceeding its authority that was granted to it by the Constitution.
So I heard you use an analogy once about the Constitution kind of being a fireplace for government. Can you?
Yes, I can. I was referring to George Washington's quote. George Washington said that government is not reason. It is not eloquence. It is fire. And like fire, it is a dangerous servant and a fearful master. If you or I were to live in a log cabin, it would be necessary for us to have fire just to survive. We would have to use the fire to warm the cabin and to cook our food. And fire would be so important to our survival that we're very likely to have a special place in that cabin for the fire. And it would naturally be the fireplace. The Founding Fathers understood that government was also important for our survival. We need government in order to maintain peace. And the Founding Fathers, in their wisdom, created a very special place for the fire, or for the government, and that was called the Constitution. Anytime the fire is inside the fireplace, it's a good fire. And anytime the fire gets outside of the fireplace, you and I should automatically and reflexively stomp it out. If the government is inside the limits of the Constitution, it is considered a good government. But anytime the government gets outside the limitations imposed on it by the Constitution, you and I and all Americans should automatically and reflexively stomp it out.
So what kind of protections, what exactly does the Constitution give us? I mean, as an average American, what does it give to me?
Well, absolutely nothing. The Constitution doesn't apply to you. The Constitution doesn't apply to me. Article 1 creates Congress, and neither you or I are a member of Congress. The second, Article 2, establishes the President and Vice President of the United States, and until after November, after I win the election, it won't apply to me. And the Article 3 establishes the outlines of the Supreme Court. So the Constitution establishes rules and guidelines for government. We, the people, have rights, and we give government privileges that are outlined by the Constitution. So if you leave a series of rules for your children telling that they can only watch television until 8 o'clock and that they have to finish their homework and be in bed by 10 o'clock, those are rules that you impose on your children. That doesn't mean that you are subject to those rules. You could stay up, as late as you want. And we need to remember the relationship between the people and the government. And the government has limitations. We, the people, have rights.
So the Constitution, what that is, are the rules for the government.
For the government. And we give government privileges, specifically to Congress, and those privileges and powers are listed in Article 1, Section 8. Therefore, anything that our government is doing, which is not explicitly listed in that section, is by definition unconstitutional.
So it seems now, though, that there are no rules for the government, that the government is doing absolutely anything that it wants.
And that's the impression that I have. And I think that that is true because the American people have forgotten the difference between rights and privileges. They have forgotten the relationship between we the people and the government. And that's one of the reasons that I teach my 8-hour class on the Constitution, to remind people of the fact that government is supposed to work for us. We the people are sovereign citizens. We are the source of all political power in the United States. And without our permission, government basically is unable to do anything that unless we give them that permission.
It seems that the public now doesn't understand the difference between a constitutional republic and a democracy. Usually when we're referring to our republic in this country, in the media, we hear it referred to as a democracy. Is that true?
Absolutely not. And it's an unfortunate misunderstanding. The word democracy does not appear a single time in the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, or the Bill of Rights. Those people who remember the Pledge of Allegiance know that we pledge allegiance to the flag and to the republic for which it stands. And if they want to go to Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution, they will discover that the Constitution clearly establishes a republican form of government.
So there are elements of a democracy.
That's correct. And democracy and a republic are the same because people are allowed to vote. However, in a democracy, people are allowed to vote on anything. And the majority wins and the minority loses. If this were a democracy, I can get 51% of my friends to vote and we can take away your property. 51% of the people can take away your rights or deny you the ability to exercise freedom of speech.
So let's say if we were living in a democracy and I was a black man living in a small town somewhere, 50% plus one
Absolutely.
could vote that black people were no longer allowed to go outside after dark, which is an actual Jim Crow law that existed, I believe, then that would be the case. But thanks to the Constitution, the kind of laws we can vote in are restricted and limited.
Absolutely. A republic, a republican form of government, protects the rights of the minority from the will of the majority. If you have property, we can all vote, but the purpose of the government is to protect your property from the majority that's apparently getting out of hand. And the Founding Fathers loathed a democracy. They referred to it as a tyranny of the majority and basically referred to it as mob rule. Unfortunately, every president in the United States since Woodrow Wilson has been stepping up to the microphone and announcing that we want to make the world safe for democracy, implying that democracy is this wonderful virtue. And anyone who has studied the Constitution and understands that fact realizes that the Founding Fathers didn't like a democracy, and they specifically gave us a constitutional republic.
Yeah, I think that the majority of Americans, when they say democracy, mean constitutional republic, but they don't quite know how to define it. And I think that's a failure of the government school system in America, because it should be teaching that. There should be no student that leaves a school that doesn't understand that kind of a thing specifically.
I think the fundamental misunderstanding, most Americans have forgotten the difference between rights and privileges. A right is something that you can do without asking. A privilege is something that someone or some entity of higher authority allows you to do. For example, if I walk out of the back door of my house, I can walk back and forth on my land, and I'm not required to ask anyone. I have a right to walk back and forth on my land. If I wanted to walk to the store, and I would have to walk across your land to get there. A privilege is something that someone or some entity of higher authority allows you to do. For example, if I walk out of the back door of my house, I can walk back and forth on my land, and I'm not required to ask anyone. I have a right to walk back and forth on my land. If I wanted to walk to the store, and I would have to walk across your land to get there, I'd have to get your permission. And on Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday, you can say, sure, Mike, no problem. What are friends for? But on Thursday, you wake up in a bad mood, you can deny me permission. You can say, walk around. That's what fences are for. And so the important distinction is that a privilege is something which you grant to me, and you can deny me anytime you want. So we have a right to freedom of religion. We have a right to freedom of speech. The First Amendment does not grant us those privileges. The First Amendment does not say you are allowed to attend any church that you want. What the First Amendment does say is that Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion, indicating that the First Amendment is further limitations on the power of government.
So the Bill of Rights then is a further set of rules for the government on what they can and cannot do?
Absolutely. And most people are aware that the Constitution has a preamble. Most of us memorized it as children. We the people, in order to form a more perfect union, etc. What most Americans do not know is that the Bill of Rights also has a preamble. And it specifically states that in an effort to prevent misconstruction or abuse of government power, that further declarative and restrictive clauses shall be added. If I make a declaration, am I asking for permission? Did we write the Declaration of Independence and ask King George if it was okay to start our own country? A declaration is a statement, a clear, defined statement. And restrictive clauses are ones that put limitations on the authority of government. And so if people were to become more familiar with the preamble to the Bill of Rights, I think that the general purpose of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights would become very clear.
So if the government made a law restricting marriage between a man and a woman, would that be a law establishing or respecting one person's interpretation of Christianity over another's?
Well, that's what they would be trying to do. But such an amendment to the Constitution that defined marriage or tried to impose a certain set of morality on all Americans would be unconstitutional. And it would violate a Supreme Court decision that was handed down in 1803, known as Marbury versus Madison. And this very famous Supreme Court decision indicated that any law repugnant to the Constitution is null and void, and is in fact no law. If, for example, one of the states were to suddenly decide that slavery was legal, and they passed a law indicating that it was okay to subjugate a particular race or subset of the population, it may be on paper, there may have been a majority of people who supported it, but it would not be constitutional. It would be an invalid proclamation.
Another thing that comes to mind is a very controversial topic now in America, which is abortion. Now, Roe versus Wade is based on a implied privacy in the Constitution. Where does that lie?
Well, abortion is a very difficult issue, and it has divided the nation, and it also divides the Libertarian Party. The platform of the Libertarian Party is based on individual ownership, the assumption that you own your own body. And we as Americans take that for granted, but it's not a universal assumption. It wasn't assumed that blacks owned their bodies in the early forming of the United States. Women in the Middle East currently do not own their body, and they are sold and traded. Children around the world are currently sold into slavery. So although we in the United States hold that you own your own body, that is not a universal concept. The current libertarian platform is one of pro-choice, the feeling that the woman owns her own body and that the government has no authority to tell her what she can do with her body. And the problem is that even within the Libertarian Party, there are many people who are concerned about the baby's ownership. And that is really the question that is being asked. When does the baby take ownership of its own body? When does it assume the right to life and the other rights that are associated with life. And that is really the question that is being debated right now.
What about this implied privacy? Where does that lie in the Constitution? That the privacy, this idea that holds up Roe versus Wade at this point?
Well, the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution is the amendment that protects your privacy. It says the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects shall not be violated, and no warrant shall issue but upon probable cause. So you have a right to be left alone. And the government does not have the authority to come in and search through your sock drawer or look under your bed just because it would be convenient for the government. Making laws that make things convenient for the government are in opposition to the Constitution. Thomas Jefferson indicated that we should bind men down with the chains of the Constitution. He didn't suggest that we should kind of loosely irritate the government with the bungee cord of the Constitution. And so there are specific things that government is not allowed to do. And in any question between government and people, we should always find in favor of the people.
So it seems now with the Patriot Act, you mentioned, it seems that the government is kind of bungee jumping with our rights. They're really stretching the cord very, very thin with the Patriot Act. How does the Patriot Act violate the Constitution?
Well, the Patriot Act presumes to give government agents the authority to search your house without a warrant. It claims that they don't have to give you a warrant or show you this warrant until 90 days after the search, which I find completely ludicrous. If you haven't complained in the first 3 months, the likelihood that the government is going to fess up and present you with this warrant after 90 days is absolutely, naive. The other violation of our constitutional rights is the Sixth Amendment. Presumably, under the Patriot Act, government can label you a terrorist. And simply because they have labeled you a terrorist, they can throw you in jail without an indictment for an indefinite period of time. You're not allowed a phone call to tell your family where you're at, and you have no due process. You have no assistance of counsel for your defense. And this flies in the face of what Americans are all about. We all know that a person in the United States is innocent until proven guilty. And so by that standard, it would be impossible for anyone to be a terrorist until after the trial.
Also, I wonder who would next be labeled as a terrorist? A drug dealer, someone that disagreed with the government on certain issues? I worry about that definition, because it is very loose. What exactly is a terrorist?
The most dangerous thing about the Patriot Act is that it opens the door for the government to suspect other people for other things and to violate everyone's due process of law. If Americans are truly concerned about liberty, we should extend that liberty to everyone. If someone really is a terrorist, giving them a trial, giving them a lawyer, allowing them to contact people and, establish a defense is not going to prevent us from putting them in jail and finding, after we find them guilty. But there's a very dangerous precedent when we allow the government to supersede the constitutional limitations.
Now, when they wanted to make during Prohibition, and you're known as Prohibition in this country, you give us the right to make alcohol illegal. So they had to make a change. Now we make many substances in the United States illegal without making any kind of a change in the Constitution.
Again, this is an indication not of the fact that government is willing to do things outside the Constitution, but it is more of an indication that Americans have lost touch with the Constitution. We, the people, ordain and establish the Constitution. We created government, and it is our responsibility to monitor the government and to keep the government within those limitations. The fact that our government can pass these laws without a public outcry is a very serious indication that we have lost touch with our founding fathers.
what can we do to restore the awareness of these rights? What can we do so that people are aware when you're violating the Constitution or when the government violates the Constitution, they're taking something very concrete away from you? How can we make people understand that?
Well, my first recommendation would be for people to memorize the Bill of Rights. I understand that that sounds like a lot of work, but it's very important. You can't protect your rights until you know precisely what they are. So that would be a fundamental thing. And the second thing that I would say is that we should ignore the old adage that it's improper to talk about religion and politics in social circles. I think that if people were more willing to talk politics with their friends, and admittedly maybe get into some heated discussions, but I think that if we discussed politics and listened to all of the issues, I think all of us would understand the Constitution and the fundamental principles better. And I think that we would be able to take care of ourselves, our rights, and be able to limit government to only its assigned duties.
So, America has a very unique culture, a culture that's imitated all over the world. Now, is the Constitution responsible for creating the atmosphere where this unique culture of modern art, of rock and roll, of rap music, of Hollywood movies that is copied all over the world? Is the Constitution responsible for creating the atmosphere that gave birth to those things?
Actually, it's just the opposite. The Constitution is an effect. That is a result of the independent spirit and attitude that we have. We, the people, have the spirit of freedom and independence. We have liberty burning inside our hearts. And we are the people who create the rock and roll music, create that spirit of freedom. And we also created the Constitution as a documentation of that spirit of freedom. So it's not the piece of paper, it's not the Constitution or the Bill of Rights that creates that. It's our love of liberty that really allows us to be free.
What about economically? How does the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, I'd like to use the term economic civil rights, I think, to ask this question. How does the Constitution and the Bill of Rights grant us our economic civil rights?
Well, again, the Constitution doesn't grant us anything. What it does is to recognize that you own your own body and you own the product of your labor. If you spend 8 hours, stacking rocks up to build a house, that is your house. That's your place to live. And you have a right to protect that property, because you are human, and without that shelter, without that food, you'll soon cease to exist.
So more precisely, the Constitution and the Bill of Rights keep the government from doing something that would take away that atmosphere of freedom.
And as libertarians, we strongly support a free market system where you are allowed to build any product or provide any service and make that good or that service available at whatever cost you think the market will bear. And when people are allowed to exchange the fruit of their labors freely, then we have economic prosperity. Anytime the government comes in with regulations to limit what you can do and set prices and minimum wage laws, then we, the people, are having our economic freedoms limited. We are allowing people in Washington to make decisions for us, which quite literally limits our liberty.
Looking at minimum wage laws, I always ask the question, why do we need a law like that? What is the government doing that makes wages so low that they then have to be artificially raised? Libertarians look at the causes of economic problems. We look towards the government and what is the government doing to keep those wages down to the point where you then have to artificially raise them. I think that I like what you're talking about a truly free market, which I don't think is what we have now.
No, certainly not.
That would be a system, an economic system that would work for the little guy too?
Oh, absolutely. And the little guy are the people who would benefit the most. When any time the government establishes regulations, let's say that they are going to require a $10,000 fee for any type of business to register, well, the large businesses are going to be able to afford that $10,000 fee. It'll be a small percentage of their overall profit. And it is the small businesses who wouldn't be able to afford that and still make a profit that would go out of business. And so it turns out that large businesses are actually lobbying for government to cause these regulations, to put the small businesses out and to eliminate much of their competition.
Some of these businesses do go out of business because of progress rather than things like that. Like when the car came in, we had people that would, shoe horses that lost their job.
That's correct.
So what about, where's the difference there between the jobs that are eliminated through progress and jobs that are eliminated through regulation?
Well, the difference is that jobs that are eliminated through progress are done through progress and through the open market. If you are providing a service that is lower quality or obsolete, people are just not going to do that. There were people who worked at carrying ice before the advent of refrigeration. But I think a more significant difference is that even if there were 10,000 people in the United States whose job it was to shoe horses, once the automobile came into existence, think of the number of jobs that were created in the automotive industry. And so
better paying jobs.
So the people who had poor paying jobs working with horses and liveries were able to improve their lot in life.
Thanks a lot. We have to wrap. Join us online at lp.org or call us at 1-800-ELECT-US, and we'll see you next time on The Libertarian Alternative.